Good morning, all, and welcome to, I think this is day 7 of Land of Hope and Dreams, a celebration of Dave Marsh's work and vision. We've been working on this event for about a year and a half, and it's been amazing. And this is our last day of panels, and it's going to be a great one. After this morning's panel on the legacies of Dave Marsh, we've got panels on music and education, and a great panel called Songs and Stories to wrap things up later on today. All of these sessions are now available on the videos tab on the Land of Hope and Dreams website, as well as on our Land of Hope and Dreams YouTube channel. And as always, even though Dave Marsh is best known as a rock journalist, music critic, and for the last 16 or 17 years, radio host, he's a lot more than that. And we've wanted this conference to reflect the entirety of Dave Marsh's work and vision. And that means building bridges between audiences and performers, between music and politics, and always with an eye towards social justice. So all of our panelists today, as always, share those values and those commitments. Before we move on to the discussion, I do want to thank our steering committee again. I'd like to thank Danny Alexander, Chris Buhalis, Charles Hughes, Susan Martinez, Lauren Anke, Alexander Shashko, Craig Warner, and Daniel Wolf. Karen Rose, who's also one of the panelists this morning, has also helped us get the word out on social media, and we sure appreciate that. I'd also like to thank our partners, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the University of Wisconsin-Madison Afro-American Studies Department. And it just occurred to me last week that 4 of us on the steering committee are products of that department. And specifically 3 of us have studied closely with Craig Warner, who's also going to be making an appearance here in just a moment. The Rock Hall played the Spotlight Conversation with Dave Marsh and Daniel Wolf on their YouTube channel last night, and they've been helpful in promoting the event. And as I said, everything is available on our website or on the Land of Hope and Dreams YouTube channel. I'd also like to remind everyone, we've been doing this for free, and but we are asking that if you have a mind to throw a few bucks somewhere, there's no better way to do it than the Kristen Ann Carr Fund. Dave Marsh and Barbara Carr started the Kristen Ann Carr Fund almost 30 years ago in honor of their late daughter, who passed away from a rare sarcoma. And the foundation raises money for sarcoma research and fellows who carry their sarcoma expertise all around the country to places that are underserved and need that special care. So again, you can go to the Kristen Ann Carr Fund. We'll put a link in the chat momentarily for that. A few housekeeping notes. The chat will be closed for this session and all of our sessions, but the Q&A window will be open. So if you have any questions for our panelists, put them in the Q&A and we will pose them to the panelists toward the end of the discussion. Closed captions are turned on, but if you want to turn them off, you can go to the bottom of your screen where it says live transcript. There's a little arrow pointing upwards. Click on that and click hide subtitles or disable subtitles, and that will turn them off. So with that, once again, before all of our panels, we're playing performances and messages from performers who have been influenced by Dave, who are friends of Dave, or who have been important to Dave's work. And this morning, we'll kick things off with a video, a message and a performance from Lauren Jenkins.
The world is full of critics. I just wish a lot more of them were like Mr. Dave Marsh. I was first introduced to Dave and his writing when I was about 15 and super green. And Dave gave me the time of day when he really didn't have to. So Dave, thank you for being one of the good ones, for your passion for music and storytelling and your honesty. Your encouragement and inspiration has helped me to keep rocking and rolling. And you know that I like the dark songs, Dave. I mean, come on, Reno. But I figured since I wrote this at the beginning of the pandemic, and I don't know, maybe you and Barbara can dance in the kitchen tonight. Lock all the doors and turn down the lights. Leave the pot on the stove. We don't need it tonight. The trouble's out there. We can leave them behind. Just take me by the hand. remind me you're mine. And put an old record on and turn it up loud with your hands on my waist and your kiss on my mouth. And know there ain't nothing missing. Let time keep on ticking and let the world keep on spinning while we dance in the kitchen. And we'll play it again if once ain't enough. Yeah, we'll go all night until the sun comes back up. So put an old record on and turn it up loud with your hands on my waist and your kiss on my mouth. And know there ain't nothing missing. Let time keep on ticking and let the world keep on spinning while we dance in the kitchen. Let the world keep on spinning while we dance in the kitchen. Love you, Dave. So thankful for you, and hope to see you soon. Mwah.
Hi, I'm Craig Werner, here to introduce the first panel of the final day, Land of Hope and Dreams. This panel is a perfect start to today, and it's a perfect culmination for what has been an amazing set of panels. Those of you who know Dave Marsh know, and worked with him as an editor particularly, know that if he read me writing that sentence, he would cross out amazing and say that there's a more precise word for what I'm getting at. But my thesaurus didn't come up with one that felt better to me. The old hippie in me suggested maybe psychedelic or far out, but knowing how Dave feels about hippies, I'm going to stick with amazing. From the first sequence of panels on Dave and the Detroit crew who more or less created rock and soul writing with Cream magazine, through the panels dealing with the politics, the music industry and media, through last week's sequence of work on community and activism, various parts of Dave's presence, I think have all been in play. Through them all, the thread that's held it together has been Dave's empathy, which has been deep enough that he will argue with you and say you're talking bullshit when you need to hear that. It's what makes him an unparalleled mentor and collaborator. To moderate today's panel, Charles Hughes.
Well, thank you so much, Craig. Someone who is really appropriate to kick us off today for many reasons. As Eric mentioned at the beginning, there are several of us on the steering committee and a lot of people participating in this who have not only been mentored and worked with Dave Marsh, but also often connected to that with Craig Werner. And so it's wonderful to have him as part of this conversation. My name is Charles Hughes. I'm a writer and I'm a teacher. I'm originally from Wisconsin. I'm now based in Memphis, Tennessee. And I'm so glad to be here today with everyone and with an incredible power trio of voices to bring into conversation as it relates to three of the really crucial things that define Dave Marsh's work, define Dave Marsh's vision, but also that define the incredible impact that that work and that vision has had as it extends out across various communities and coalitions. I am someone who started reading Dave Marsh's work very young in central Wisconsin, trying to figure out what it meant to not only write about music, but to hear music in the way that I knew I did, but didn't necessarily have the words for quite yet. I learned so much from his work even before I met him, and now have gotten the chance to know him and work with him over the years in various capacities. And I've also gotten a chance to work with and get to know our three incredible panelists here today. I'm going to introduce them briefly, and then we'll kind of kick off our conversation. Of course, as Eric mentioned before, if you have questions or things you want us to put in conversation as we go, feel free to throw them in the Q&A, and we will try to get to them if we can. So I'm just going to briefly introduce everyone here, and then I'm going to kind of kick us off with an opening conversation. So I'll just briefly, in alphabetical order, please welcome our folks here with us today. First of all, we have James Bernard, who is a founding partner and editor of The Source, and a founding editor of Double XL, two of the most important publications in the United States in the last 40 years or so. I'm not hyperbolizing. He co-authored the new book of rock lists with Dave Marsh. This is a book that, among the many we've talked about this weekend, we haven't talked about too much, but I can say from my own personal perspective that the new book of rock lists was absolutely crucial to me and remains so. I consult it still, and so it's so wonderful to have him with us for that as well. And he is a member of the nominating committee of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. James Bernard has spent the majority of his career as a social and political activist, with an incredible list of accomplishments and alliances that I won't read through simply for time's sake, but suffice to say that he has done the work and continues to do it in many different ways. Currently, for example, he does community outreach for New York City's Vaccine Command Center. We also have Chris Buhalis, a singer-songwriter from Detroit, who has released two critically praised albums, Kenai Dreams and Big Car Town. For those of you who've been with us earlier, hopefully you got a chance to watch a message and performance from Chris earlier on, and if not, you can access it later on our YouTube channel. Dave Marsh, among others, has hailed his work. Growing up in Detroit, Buhalis was exposed to all forms of American music. After, quote, finishing college, that's his quotation marks around there, he picked up a guitar, started writing songs and playing live. In 1995, he met Townes Van Zandt, who encouraged him to record his songs. Buhalis has toured the United States and Italy, played any number of clubs, festivals, coffee houses, union halls, house concerts, and campfires. Building a solid reputation as a songwriter and a compelling live performer, he is known for his acerbic wit and his powerful vocal performances. He lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And finally, we have Karen Rose, a music writer, archivist, and historian who has contributed to publications like Pitchfork, NPR Music, Vulture, Salon, Polestar, and Billboard, among others. Hopefully you had a chance to watch Karen's incredible conversation with John Landau. And also, if you have been at all connected with us with this festival, it's a celebration on social media. Karen has been doing that crucial work as well. In 2018, she authored 5 essays ranging from Aretha Franklin to Joan Jett for the anthology Women Who Rock, an essential publication if you don't have it. And in 2017, she contributed an essay on Maybelle Carter to the essay collection Woman Walk the Line, another essential publication. Her next book that I cannot wait for, Why Patti Smith Matters, will be published by the University of Texas Press in the spring of 2022. It's going to change everything. So look for that one. And she currently resides in Detroit. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us today and for being a part of not only today's conversation, but the broader community that we are celebrating over these 3 amazing weekends. I want to start just with kind of a general question, something that has certainly become kind of a theme over the course of this. And just to get us all started, especially since we're talking about mentorship, empathy, and collaboration as it relates to Dave Marsh and the worlds that he's been a part of. I want to just ask each of you, how did you become aware of Dave Marsh's work, of whatever that means, of all the things that he's done? And then also, how did you end up meeting him or coming into contact with him? So basically, what's, as someone put it earlier, what's your origin story as it relates to your connection to Dave Marsh? And maybe we'll just start off going in alphabetical order. James, would you like to begin?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this morning. I feel like I was saying when we were prepping that it's hard for me not to talk personally because, you know, it's Dave. And I'm sitting here in my apartment talking to I don't know how many people. You know, this is not like a public panel. I feel like Dave has been, you know, sort of part of. I met Dave very early in my career, like right after the Source started. And it wasn't long after that before I came in contact with Dave, before I even thought about myself as like a music critic. And I was trying to remember exactly the first time I met him. I'm pretty sure that when I met him that he reached out to me, which says a lot about this panel. And just the fact that he was aware at the time that the Source was publishing. I mean, this is more than 20 something years ago, almost doggone, man, almost 30. I mean, I can't even think about it. And when we first broke bread, he asked me to work on the Rock List book with him. And I learned a lot about how to move in this world as a mentor, as a critic, from Dave. And it was almost through osmosis because I wasn't even aware of the fact that I was wanting to be a music critic, you know, so to speak. I mean, this is before I started writing for The Voice. This is before I had anything published in Rolling Stone. This is before I started writing for The Times. Dave reached out to me. And I guess I haven't asked him.
I think we're frozen. James is frozen here. Wait a second to get him back, and if not, we can. Oh, there we go. You froze for a second, James. I don't know if are you with us?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You hear me?
Yes.
I apologize for that. Where did I freeze?
You were talking about how he reached out to you even before you really were publishing a lot and in The Voice and The Times and elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I'll stop right there, but I think that says a lot about Dave. I mean, I think that, you know, there's a larger issue here of mentorship and collaboration that we can talk about. But, you know, now that you're sort of pushing me to think about when I first met Dave, I'm realizing that he reached out to me when there was really no other reason to reach out, and except if you were really looking for new voices and new talent to connect with. And after having, you know, gotten to know him, it doesn't seem like something that it's extraordinary looking back now. At the time, it seems so natural, but it's extraordinary.
Absolutely. Chris, you wanna take the next one?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I grew up in Detroit, but I grew up kind of after, well, I grew up definitely after Dave had left Cream magazine. So I didn't really come across his writing in Cream. Dave was first on my radar because I was a Bruce Springsteen fan. And the way I was when I was a kid, and I kind of still am, that I kind of have to relate to people and to really believe them in things. So like, for instance, like Bruce, you know, I remember being a little kid and Bruce sang about Roy Orbison and Thunder Road. And to me, when I was about 9 years old, when I remember hearing that, I thought, wow, he gets it because he knows that Roy Orbison's a great singer, you know. And I had a similar thing with Dave, and that I read his biography of the Born to Run book, his biography of Bruce, when I was about 12 or 13 years old, and that led me to, when I was 17, picking up Fortunate Son, his collected works at the public library. And in reading that, I learned a lot about where I lived. The introduction to that book had a huge impact on me. Growing up in an all-white suburb where I lived at the time, in Detroit, and not really understanding a lot of the things that were going on around me, a lot of the cultural attitudes of racism and all these things that were happening. He really had I was feeling things, but I didn't have the way to intellectually articulate it in any way. And Dave had already obviously done all this work, and I read it and I couldn't find any holes in his logic. I wasn't really good at coming up with my own how things work, but I could destroy a bullshit argument, pretty easily. And I found it pretty hard with Dave. And then I went to a folk music conference, the Folk Alliance, in 1998. My first record was coming out. So this is about 10 or 11 years after reading Fortunate Son. And I got on an elevator, and Dave was on the elevator with our friend Tom Jurek, who I'd never met at the time. I met them both at the same time. And so it's really memorable for me meeting Dave, because he had become not like a major figure in my life, but he was someone who really helped me along my way of understanding the world, and through his writing. And in Dave fashion, like it's interesting to hear James say, looking back, it seems extraordinary. But at the time, it was just totally normal, and still feels normal, actually, because I got on the elevator and I said, "Oh, Dave Marsh." I saw his name badge, and I was kind of surprised to see him there, because I didn't expect to see him at a folk music conference. And I said, "You wrecked my life." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I read your book on Bruce when I was a kid, and I'm afraid to sign a recording contract, And he said, "You read my book when you were a kid? Fuck you." And we've kind of been friends ever since then. It's just one of those TV moments. But Dave came and saw me play when my record came out at that conference. And the image that I had my friends Jeff Blankenhorn and Matt Combs playing with me, great musicians. And Dave saw me play and came up right after the show and started talking to me about music and everything. Ray Wiley Hubbard stole my band away from me, so I didn't have to talk to those guys. So they went to go play with Ray, and Dave and I just kind of walked off talking about stuff, and we really haven't stopped talking about stuff since. That's about that.
Cool. And Karen, what about you?
So for some reason, my parents got me a Rolling Stone subscription when I was like 11. And so I was reading, because I was music crazy, and I would read everything. And so I got, I started paying attention, like I like this person's writing, or I don't, I was watching for bylines, but when I was 11, that's what it was called. And Dave was one of those people, and I can remember reading him. I can vividly remember the experience of reading him and thinking, I can do this. I understand what he's saying. It's not detached. It felt real. I talked about this in the conversation with John Landau about reading. He wrote about Patti Smith in 1976, and the way he wrote about her pregnancy, and and he just like, this is just a thing that happens. And it was just so, everyone else that wrote about it in such an icky and prurient way. It just really stuck with me. When I started writing about music for my high school newspaper, something in me decided I was going to send this to Dave Marsh, because he was going to care very much about what I had to say about The Who. And he wrote back to me. And I didn't get to meet him until I was in college, and before I Get Old came out. And I got they sent a copy of the book to the newspaper, and we're like, do you want to interview the author? Like, do I want to interview the author? I'm getting on the crosstown bus right now. And this is going to be very similar to you guys, where he was having lunch with someone. I do not remember who it was, but when I got to his apartment building, there was a note with the doorman that said, I'm here, come join us. And it wasn't like you were this 20-year-old person who knows nothing. He was always like, Karen, what do you think? And I couldn't believe this was actually happening. But I started sending him, really started sending him my clips. And they occasionally showed up in Rock and Rap Confidential, which I just also couldn't believe. Like, I made a good point. Dave Marsh quoted me. And then, we reconnected many years later at the same place that Charles, you and I met for the first time, which was at the first Springsteen conference. So and we've stayed in touch, and I've been on the radio show, and I think my favorite thing that Dave ever said about me was that I was the harshest critic of Bruce Springsteen. I was the harshest critic of Bruce Springsteen in the fan base that still understood what he was trying to do. There you go.
Wow. Yeah. I would second that also, having read. Excellent. Yeah. Karen, I remember also at that conference, which was that during he was moderating our panel, and I remember during my paper, in the middle of it, he like called bullshit on something I'd said, like in the middle of it, which really speaks, I think, to that sort of supportive, blunt disagreement that I think all of us have been speaking to. That it was such a helpful moment, but it was also like so outside the kind of it was wonderful. I still think about that a lot. Cool. So all three of you, in various different ways, if we're thinking about this notion of collaboration, not just in sort of how we've collaborated with Dave Marsh or in that, but all three of you in these various ways have been, crucial collaborators in the work that you've done. And it's such a great range of experiences that we have here that really speak actually to a lot of the range from activism to, being a musician and everything in between. So I'm wondering if we could just talk a little bit about the process of collaboration, which is such an important part of what we all do, but also, is something that we hopefully have learned things about and have thoughts about. How do each of you approach the process of collaboration? How have you found, what have you found effective? What are the challenges? How do you collaborate? I know it's a very broad question, but hopefully it's purposely so to elicit a range of responses. What does collaboration mean to you?
Trust. It's a lot about trust. It's a lot about because in this context, it's hard to separate out collaboration and sort of the mentorship aspect of it. You're talking about how, when I met, if I speak personally, when I met Dave, how I came to work with Dave, it was in my formative time, like I said, is learning of even knowing that I was going to move in this world, right? And so it's hard. It's hard to give other people the keys when you don't have to. Collaboration when you're already sort of peers, but when somebody chooses to engage you as a peer, when they're more established, that's difficult to do. And it takes a certain instinct of humility that is not common. And when I say give the keys and trust, I mean give the keys, trust, and accept the results enthusiastically. The Rock List book was not just me and Dave, but we involved a whole team of people. it was a little bit of a community of folks. And, that book has our names on it, but there are a lot of different voices in it. And that instinct, I think, is key.
I agree with all that. And I think collaboration, this is a tough question because I find it in different forms of my work. Like, for instance, I find it somewhat difficult to collaborate like songwriting. I'm not good at co-writing. I have successfully co-written one song with my dear friend Jeff Plankenhorn, but that's because we have the elements of trust that like James is talking about. And I think that I didn't think I was going to be well suited to answer this question because I don't think of the mentorship as a thing, because I kind of fleetingly interact with people more often than like I haven't studied under one person like I've witnessed. Like a lot of people have Craig Werner as what I would consider a mentor, and I think of that as a more classical definition. But one thing that really strikes me with Dave is that he will offer that trust like he did with James or with Karen. I've had similar experience. The year after I met Dave, he called me before the next Folk Alliance. I believe it was the very next year. And, just a normal conversation that an unknown songwriter gets. Dave Marsh calls you and says, well, I'm on this panel at Folk Alliance about music and politics, and Jackson Browne backed out, and I was wondering if you could replace him. And I'm like, yeah, I can do that. But I mean, I would never, that's not something I would have even, not only would I have not sought it out, it never would have been on my radar as something that I would even consider, that was something I would go watch, not something I would be very interested in going to see it. But I've always appreciated that Dave, felt that way enough about me that he would, and like he did with Karen, even though you're in high school, part of collaboration is just that respect where someone doesn't elevate themselves above somebody else on a very basic level. And I think that's one thing that Dave has really just been a guiding light for me. I don't always live up to it, but I've seen him just include everybody of every facet of things, because I think he really deeply understands how we all have to work together. The collaboration is what's going to make anything work. And if we don't really collaborate, we're all kind of fucked, because if we all just try and go through this thing as solo artists in our lives, things aren't going to happen that are going to work out well for most people. And I think that for me, that's the part of the collaboration that like I've gone on to work with music. I do collaborate a lot with organizations. Like I've been active with local peace groups, and I work with the Veterans for Peace, putting on concerts in a fundraising type of way, trying to collaborate with people in ways that I can to be constructive towards social justice and things that we all care about. And I think that's something that Dave has really helped with a lot.
So my take on collaboration is being able to deliver the hard messages. If I'm being edited or I'm working with somebody and somebody doesn't say to me, this is not good, it's not helpful. It's not helpful to just say, oh yeah, this is great. It's helpful when you challenge me. And I think that I have like Dave, sometimes I have struggled with this because and one thing I definitely have learned just from getting older is how to deliver that constructive message. And I think that it is not a thing that has made me super popular with some people, but it's life is short. We have a lot to do. I'm not going to get better if you don't tell me what's wrong. You're not going to get better if I can't tell you what's wrong. You know, some of my favorite moments were when I would be a guest on the radio show, on one of Dave's radio shows, and he would say something and I would be like, air horn bullshit. And Jim Rotolo would be cracking up behind the board. And I wasn't doing it as like just like a boy howdy. I was doing it because I can just remember we're talking about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, when he was talking like, here's all the things, and I'm like, I just leaned into the microphone. I was like, the Velvet Underground, and he just stopped talking because he didn't have a response to it. Charles, I hope I answered your question. I'm not sure I did.
Of course. Yeah, no, totally. It seems like one of the things that is already kind of emerging as a theme of this, and it's emerging, I think, throughout the three, is that, you know, that often when we think about collaboration, or we think about mentorship, or we think about other things, that we tend to think about the places of agreement, right? Which obviously makes sense because that is necessary. But I think one of the things that we're all speaking to, and I think we've all experienced, and we've quite literally spoken to, are the way that the moments of disagreement, or the moments of challenge, whether we are being challenged or doing the challenging, how crucial they can be. And it does seem like that's something that sometimes gets lost when we're thinking about how do we collaborate, right? That we need those moments of, you know, healthy, constructive conflict. But
Absolutely. I think those moments of conflict, and like Dave's done it to any of us. I'm sure he's called bullshit on you guys for any number of things.
mm-hmm.
I just find it such a show of respect, because no one calls bullshit on somebody, you know, because unless you're just trying to punish them and ridicule them. But the other side of it is that you believe that they can comprehend what you're trying to say and get it.
Or you see their validity, you know.
Exactly.
There's a respect there. You know, yeah. And I think that's and it's to grow as an artist, to grow as anybody, as a person. You know, I mean, I learned a lot about, I mean, I met Dave before I was, you know, I mean, I wasn't in high school like Karen, but I was just coming to New York. I was, you know, I mean, I don't think I was married yet. I wasn't. I didn't have kids. I mean, and the Rocklist book came together at a very difficult time in Dave and Barbara's lives. And so it's hard for me to separate the way all of that out, you know. And I know that we've had all these panels, and this one seems to have, you know, such a personal sort of bent to it, in the way, you know, but it's a lot about the way you treat other people that I sort of learned, maybe through osmosis, you know, the way you deal with grief, you know, the way you deal with, you know, difficult times, you know, the way you know, literally and figuratively welcome people into your lives. You know, it's hard for me to separate all that out, you know, talking about empathy, you know, talking about collaboration and what, you know, because of the personal experience that I had here. And I do feel like it did affect the way, and has affected the way, that I've tried to at least deal with other people. And part of it was because at the time that I met him, I thought that's the way people dealt with people. You know, didn't seem, I didn't have the negative, you know, I didn't have the negative experiences that, so, you know, I feel very fortunate that way.
I think that what you're saying is you those pieces are not separate in Dave. You know, he talks the talk and walks the walk. So it's not like he's going to interact differently with Dave in grief. Is still Dave, and he's still holding to his principles. And this is not to say, oh, Dave is perfect in this guru, but he lives and works with integrity. anyway, that's what I was struck by when you were sharing that story, James. And I think I know some of us have talked about encounters with him when my mother had cancer, and I just sort of mentioned it as an aside, and he was like, "What kind of cancer?" I'm like, "Well, it's very rare." And he's like, "What kind of cancer?" And as soon as I told him, he could just rattled off this. He's like, "Tell your mother to call me." And she didn't, but that's another story for another day. But it was just, I mean, and it was, what's the word I'm looking for? It was matter of fact. It was Dave. It was just Dave. It wasn't pity. It wasn't condescension. It was just, this is what we need to do. Anyway.
And I've had similar exact conversations with him a couple of times, and I think you'll agree. I mean, there was no doubt that he was 100% serious and invested in it, and it wasn't a hollow offer or some gesture of anything other than there's a problem here and I might be able to help you with it.
Yeah.
And I value that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thinking about empathy, right? Thinking about this really kind of radical process, right? That I think is at the core of so much of the work that we have all done and what we've learned from Dave Marsh or worked with Dave Marsh, but also more broadly. One of the things that I think is so interesting and might be worth talking about, because I'd be interested to hear y'all's perspective on this, again, coming from the variety of experiences that you all have bring to this. One of the things that is interesting, right, is balancing the radical process of empathy and understanding with also, holding on to things that we believe in and that we know are true, and not saying that there have to be limits to empathy, but I was wondering if you all might speak to that kind of either from a kind of critical perspective, right? Also all the way to demanding social justice in the way that we need it and a radical vision of reordering society. Where does empathy play into that? And how do you balance the need for kind of hearing where people are and where they're coming from with a desire to enact change or, even just argue about music, right? Like how does that work? How does empathy play into those processes for you all? And again, take that in any way you want.
The one thing that came up, this popped in my head, and I don't know if it's relevant here because I don't have my dictionary to look at empathy in the strict definition, but the phrase "challenge the audience" came up. I think both, Karen and Chris talked about calling bullshit, and like I said, it's hard for me to separate out because one of my, my formative experience was working with Dave as my voice as a writer and as an editor and as a collaborator was happening. But, I think that a lot of it is challenging the audience and challenging the audience's values too. I mean, not just in terms of their musical taste, but seeing the audience as whole people, not just music fans. I think that's an important thought here somewhere.
Yeah, I feel that a lot. I mean, that trusting your audience, whoever they are, be it whether the person you're arguing about music or if it's an audience sitting before you when you're playing music, like that challenge is really central. Because if all you want to do is, lecture somebody, you can go do that. But if the idea is to have a conversation, then there has to be that respect for the other person in there. And I think that's where the empathy comes in. This question, I'm trying to think of the limits. Like I was brought up in a union family, which is one thing that, that strong stance on labor issues, one thing that Dave and I bonded upon. But like I was thinking about like, oh, things, you know, this popped in my head while you asked this question. I don't know if it's relevant or not, but I remember when Richard Spencer got punched in the head on the street. Now there's a part of me that doesn't believe anybody should be punched in the head for talking on the street corner. You know, and I don't go around punching people, but there's also the part of me that doesn't give a shit whether Richard Spencer gets punched in the head, because I've got bigger things to have empathy for. And I'm trying to really, maybe I'm a miser with my empathy, but it, like with Dave, you know, we're talking about separating the personal from, you know, other things. I think I wouldn't even try to separate any of my personal feelings about Dave or things that we share, because I don't think I don't know how to do it. One, I don't know, you know, my personal feelings are kind of what I'm here talking about. But it struck me that I just want to say that, you know, Billy Bragg says that solidarity is empathy plus action. And I think Dave is so action oriented that when empathy enters the equation, that, I mean, you experience a really, like, it's solidarity, and solidarity is a powerful thing. And it's not just, oh, I feel for somebody. That's, you know, Dave can feel empathy, that your mom had cancer or that my wife had cancer, but it's the action that he takes and the action that we take when we experience things like that are really what are going to get us through. You know, like, you know, I love labor and labor unions, but unions are not a source of power. The solidarity is the source of the power. You can have a union that doesn't do anything for you. They're not worth anything if you all get together and bond together. And I think Dave understands that better than most anybody I've ever met, because keep bringing it back to Dave, but it's kind of, this whole conference is about him, so I guess it's all right. But so that's what I think. It's a tough walk for me. I worry about myself sometimes, trying not to get gleeful when Nazis get punched is hard.
I'm going to get gleeful when Nazis get punched, because they're Nazis, always punch Nazis. So what I was thinking about is when I'm writing, and this is an argument I often find myself having with editors, which is, I don't want to write down to the reader, but I also don't want to alienate the reader, and finding that place, where it's a tough balance, but and that's how I think of empathy, which is, I want to give you the information, but I also want you to go listen to the song. I want you to go look up who this person is. I don't want to tell you everything about them. I respect you too much as a reader to spoon feed you like that. So that's what I think about. Especially, I think that's a thing I kind of absorbed from reading his Rolling Stone work, particularly. The Cream work is performance art. Not that it's not valid, but it's at a different level to me. Also, I came to it much later. I was already a more sophisticated reader. But that's what I think about in terms of empathy. I am more ready to punch a Nazi than the next person, I guess.
Well, there you go. If we leave this with nothing else, we've got Karen Rose on the record as, yeah, no, but and actually I thought that might actually be a good segue into, I thought I would, you know, also in the spirit of, I think one of the things that Dave Marsh has certainly taught me, but also I think has really made a point throughout his career, is that, you know, part of collaboration and mentorship and all those things is you know, spotlighting the work of the people who are coming into your orbit and doing it with such a, you know, supportive, challenging, but also, encouraging way. So I thought I would kind of ask each of you a question just sort of about your own stuff, to kind of talk a little bit in relation to what you all do. And obviously all three of you could talk for an entire 90 minutes about the work you do. So this is not meant to sum that up, but I'll start with you, Karen. You know what, so much of the writing of yours that has really resonated with me is in one way or another, either kind of considering these kind of canonical figures or expanding the canon into new ways and disrupting our understanding. I'm thinking particularly of the work that you've done in the Women Who Rock and Women Walk the Line collections, but also other things. And we've talked a bit at some points about this kind of canon formation as it relates to music criticism. How do you approach this process as someone who contends with whether it's Springsteen or Maybelle Carter or, working around these figures and doing it in such a direct way? How do you approach this process with these artists?
So I approach that work pretty much the same way I approach all my other work, which is I over-research. I go very far. And at this point in my career, I just know that's part of my process, because I don't know what I will call, what I will end up using. Like when I wrote about Sister Rosetta Tharpe for Turning the Tables 2 years ago, I spent way more time in the Schomburg Library than I probably needed to, but I really I wanted to just sort of, I just need to get in there and get dirty and get my hands in all of the information, especially, I don't want to say negative pieces, but not pieces. I like to just know how other people are looking at it. I don't know if I'm answering your question, Charles.
No, yeah.
And it's not so that I can consciously counter it or answer for it, but I think that is part of it, especially artists who are no longer with us and who did not get the attention that they should have they did not get their flowers while they were alive. I want to make sure that I do that. When I do that, I know I am not going to be convincing the people who think that way, but I'm doing it to stop someone else from starting to think that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And sort of offering, like we've been saying before, right? Offering your challenge or your affirmation as an offering to a listener to kind of contend with it the way. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, you can. I just wrote about Ricky Lee Jones's book, and this is not anything terribly new to what I've been doing recently, but just here is my take. Here is how I see it. Maybe maybe you haven't yet formed a thought, or you don't know how to form that thought. I mean, that is definitely a thing that I struggle with, because in our sort of post-factual society, people care less about what is the actual truth and I think about this with concert reviews. Concert reviews are no longer about to most people, they're not reading it to learn something new, which is what I always read them for. Either people now read it to affirm what they were thinking or what they felt, and if it doesn't, then they're going to get attacked on Twitter. Anyway, I'm gonna stop talking because I think I'm talking past your point at this point, Charles. Or I'm in violent agreement and I'm just continuing to violently agree.
No, I think that is certainly true. No, I think that was absolutely on point.
It's interesting. I mean, I was struck by what you said about why people read certain things today, because, you know, I mean, what I'm experiencing just, you know, seeing my children come into age musically. And it's been a different experience with all three of them. But I do think that I mean, there are two things that pop up. One is, you know, the lack of things for them to read, to learn about the artist and learn about the context, to get to step back and get a larger view of what you're listening to and, you know, what it means in a way, not to spoon feed people, but just to get that larger perspective. I don't think people are getting that anymore, or as much. The other thing in terms of, I want to throw this out there because I know that it's we're getting on in time, but just to throw out that, like, how much of a visionary thing it was, this probably came up on another panel, that Rock and Roll Confidential became Rock and Rap Confidential many moons ago. I mean, that paradigm shift, because when we first started The Source, and even as Double XL started, people were thinking rap was like disco. Nothing was wrong with it. You know what, that whole thing. And that's pretty visionary to see that, right? And the other thing that comes to mind, hearing what Karen was saying, was not, as a critic, not being shy to be a champion. And I think that, you know, this whole narrow view of what music criticism is and objectivity, you know, I remember having many conversations. I mean, I want to give a shout out to Lee Ballinger, because one of the greatest things of getting into Dave's world was my having a relationship with Lee for especially that I was going to California a lot. And having, you know, talking about how BS it was to adhere to this notion of objectivity, you know. And at the time I was also writing reviews for Entertainment Weekly. So hearing that perspective was very important. But I just want to throw those two things out. I mean, the breadth of vision, the rock and rap thing, and also just the idea of, like I said, being a champion and a champion of a certain, I mean, when he, you know, when I think about Bruce Springsteen, because I'm not a connoisseur, but a lot of it is informed by Dave, and it's a lot about the values and the social justice, and that had a big impact on me. That the values in the music is important, and also that is not a bad thing to champion. You know, so when everybody was, you know, when New York was at the center of the hip hop map, there was a lot of energy at The Source talking about the West Coast before that was, you know, I lived in the Bay Area for a while, and that was a conscious choice too, because the hottest radio at that point, other than New York, was in the Bay. And I'm not saying that's because of Dave, but certainly that impulse didn't feel strange to me because of my being influenced by Dave. I think that's important.
Well, that actually, that you sort of already answered the question I was going to pose to you, James, about the Source and about Double XL. But to kind of follow up on that, you know, one of the things that is so powerful about both of those publications is just how significantly they helped shift and create a kind of conversation, and opened a kind of critical conversation, not only around hip hop, but forcing everybody to kind of rethink, you know, what the critical discourse could and should be. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about kind of that you know, of your own kind of vision with those publications, and also then maybe how, in what ways it did or did not connect to all of this incredible activist work that you continue to do, were there connections that you have seen between the work that you've done as a writer and as an editor, particularly with the Source and Double XL, but also more broadly, and the activist and organizing and advocacy work that you continue to do in such an important way?
Well, look, a lot of the Source, as people may or may not know, my time at the Source, and there was a certain time at the Source, they came to an end, I think prematurely, where the publication didn't fulfill the vision that we had for it. And one of the key aspects of that vision, I mean, the subhead was the magazine of hip hop music, culture, and politics. And that wasn't even my decision. That was from day one. Okay, I came on maybe on the third issue, the fourth issue, and that was already there. And there was a sense, there were two things. One is, I'll just throw out two thoughts. One is, we saw ourselves as commenting on the culture like the artists were. So we felt as if every issue was like an album. It was like a statement, okay? It wasn't just that we were reacting to the culture, we were helping to shape the culture. That's the way we saw it. And that's a great thing about being first, maybe, and being able to set an agenda. But we saw ourselves as helping to shape a culture, or the culture. My second thought is slipping my mind. But social movements. We saw, I made a joke not too long ago that if we had survived, and again, I'm not saying if we had survived, I mean, there was so much going on in terms of magazines. We have been smart enough to make the leap to digital, had the same sort of influence as we did at the time. Would that have grown? There's some people who argue that we were positioned to do so. But I think there was an explicit desire to build a social movement, to have an influence in that way. I think it echoes a lot of the stuff that I think that Rock and Rap Confidential is about. But that was something that we talked openly in the office about. That we wanted to build something to actually, help to that part of a key component of building a social movement is cultural hegemony. The Source started, and I think took hold, and because I think we were fans. And I think when people read the magazine, they saw that we were fans like they were fans. Right? And the other thing is that I don't think we were condescending. The Source started, my business partners, when I met them, they were undergrads at Harvard. I was at the law school. We didn't dumb it down, the people who were at the magazine at the time, this original Source Mind Squad, formally educated or not formally educated, college or not college, the rappers that were on the scene at the time, smartest people I've met in my life, right? None of us dumbed it down. We kept the dialogue at a very high level. My brother, I have a younger brother, and at the time, 6-year age difference seemed like a lot back then, right? Now it's nothing. But one of his friends used to joke that like he used to have to go to the dictionary, we really wanted to take the audience on a journey. And part of that journey was not only culturally, look, there's all this stuff happening outside of New York City, right? But was also, we can change the world. I really believe that. And so, when I think back, because you do think we had lightning in a bottle at some point. But we really did want to change the world and build a social movement. And I feel like a lot of what is not happening out there in terms of progressive social movements is the inability of people who at least share the same beliefs that I do to influence and set an agenda culturally, that we had an opportunity and we were doing at the source. And I don't think that the potential of that was ever really fully realized. Didn't mean to go on for so long, but.
Oh, no, absolutely.
I would say is James, they wouldn't have let you. I mean, white supremacy.
Well, I mean, look, a lot of that, I have a very good friend of mine. After the source, I still pursued a vision of a media company that would do this. It would, part of what it would do explicitly, or not explicitly, but it would try to create a conversation. And a very good friend of mine who was shot by the Klan and the Nazis, speaking of Nazis, in 1979 in Greensboro, North Carolina. Paul Bermazon, and I was sitting with him probably around, I mean, it was a while ago, like 15 years ago. And I was saying, look, there are a bunch of us and, after Double XL and, we're trying to raise this money and we're getting some traction. This is when, a lot of money was flowing for media companies because of the internet, all of blah, 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 right? And he looked at me and he said, if you get close to pulling this off, you better be ready to go to jail for the rest of your life. And so I was going to say, I don't know what prompted me to say this. I haven't really told anybody this. And I think it's an important thing to sort of say in response to they wouldn't have let you, because it does sound like hyperbole, but it's not. It's not. And, for somebody who, walks with a limp now because of a bullet that a Klansman put in his head because he was, a leftist, an open communist, maybe they wouldn't have let us, yeah, maybe not. But I think there was a lane open with hip hop at a certain time. And I think that, when you have, I think there was an opportunity there that wasn't realized to do something that approached that and be, because I don't think anybody's really captured that audience in the way that we did. But has anybody, you know what I'm saying? Has anybody, I mean, like, I wasn't around when Rolling Stone was early, I've read the books or whatever. Sorry about the ding, but I don't know, but I know we don't have that now. I know we don't have that now. Sorry.
And it's such a, I think one of the things that I've certainly learned, from Dave Marsh's work, but also, from other folks, is that it's not that everything we write needs to be radically dangerous, but we need to write that when we need to, right? And that the listening that we do musically we can't separate those two things, just as we can't separate our fandom from our object, right? To go back to something you were saying before, I think the commitment to, saying what needs to be said and understanding why it needs to be said, I think is something that, bridges all of our work, certainly. Well, Chris, I definitely also want to shine a spotlight on your work too. And that actually may be a kind of a good segue also, that, as someone whose music, you think about your music as in a context of a movement, right? Or in a context of at least being a part of that consciousness for you. I was wondering, as a musician, you know, one of the things, again, that the great music writers, including Dave Marsh, really teach us is how to hear in that kind of context, and to recognize that the musicians are listening and creating in that kind of context. So if you were to sort of put your own, you know, what are the influences musically, politically, culturally, what are the contexts around your music that you make that you find particularly resonant in this kind of incredible mixture that you've created? What's in your, you know, your personal mixtape, sonically or otherwise, that has influenced you and continues to in the music that you're creating?
Well, I mean, like looking at how I'm totally blown away by everything Karen and James said, so I'm still digesting here. But like I don't feel like I'm doing anything that's cutting edge. And being a white guy with a guitar, I'm kind of coming from a place of privilege where we've always been kind of expected to speak our mind. And like, in a weird way, I can say just about whatever I want. No one, and I'll get backlash from some people who are, you know, the normal people, but I don't get a cultural backlash. But one thing that's been really reaffirmed by the way we all talk about music and by the way we think about our audiences, like as a musician, I feel like I'm part of something that started long before me, just like a lot of those movements we're talking about. We don't come out, like we say in the union movement, you know, no one, you know, you're not really that tall. You're standing on the shoulders of the people who came before you. And I think we're all doing that artistically, musically, critically. But the thing that we're all talking about, and I think is just the key element, that we don't always need to talk about radical things, but we always have to feel that we can. We always have to feel that, you know, and what we say is valuable, but not to where like I'll sing about things that I think are important. I'll challenge my audience. I've had people walk out of my shows. I did a show the day that at the Arc in Ann Arbor. It was the only time in my life I didn't want to do a gig because it was the day of the synagogue bombing in Pittsburgh. And I was so angry and distraught that I did not want to go on stage. And I'd never had that experience before. I've always looked forward to that part. And I didn't, and I honestly, I did not rise to the occasion. I did not bring solace. I did not bring any understanding. I turned the room blue with my unmitigated anger. Some people walked out. I challenged the audience about white supremacy and things, but I don't know any other way to play it. I don't know what else. Like I could have gone in there and tried to placate people or do whatever, but I don't see any value in it. I think you have to respect people, and the people that are going to get it are going to get it. And I think the only other thing I want to say is that is though I feel it's important to have my beliefs or to speak, or anyone's to have their beliefs and to speak them, it's so important to listen to other people's beliefs. And also when we state them, have the understanding that not everyone is going to agree. You know, I think that's one thing that some people think Dave, you know, he'll write you know, he's so opinionated, which is a Detroit thing. It's not a Dave Marsh thing. It's not just Dave, but some people get so offended when you say anything that takes a position because they think you're chastising them or you're getting on them. It's like, I don't expect you to believe everything that I believe, but I don't understand how anyone would not feel comfortable. Like, otherwise, what are we doing? You know, what are we talking about? If all you want to, you know, if the world's burning down and you want to hear some song about how my girlfriend left me, I could do that, I suppose. But I mean, it just doesn't really add anything. And I'm just trying to find value in what I do. And I think that's one thing that this whole conference is really tied together for me, that all these people in different walks of life, with Dave kind of as our hub in this particular instance, but we all feel that way about our work and how we're actually trying to do something bigger than just entertain or, you know, create words.
Amen. Well, I want to turn things over to Q&A in a second, but I want to end with a question that I kind of end every time I get a chance to talk with amazing people. I always like to ask this question. What's some music right now for you that's giving you life? And it doesn't need to be new music or old music or whatever, but what's What's some music that you've been engaging with recently that is helping you in whatever way you need it right now? What's some stuff that you're listening to? Yeah, Karen.
I have been I've been listening to a lot of the music that comes out of Sahel Sounds, and there's a trio of women, Tuareg women called Les Filles de Ilig, I cannot pronounce this, Ilig Haddad. And they are women playing instruments in a culture where they are not supposed to do that. And I really a couple of their artists were supposed to go on tour right before the Panini, and they unfortunately didn't get to see them. But they also, there's a big culture in Africa about passing music via WhatsApp, and they release these mixtapes on Bandcamp every month, like music from Saharan WhatsApp. And last summer especially, I mean, I'm lucky that I've done a little bit of travel in that part of the world, but it was one of the things I could put it on in my car and just feel like I was somewhere else. I just think at this point in my music listenership, I'm looking to just to hear other things. But that's I was glad you asked that question. I was annoyed, and then I was glad because I could talk about this stuff. But it's Sahel. I'll put it in the chat. Anyway.
Yeah. I've been like, especially this last year, it's been really hard. I damn near lost my mind. But besides live streams from friends around the world, like from all over the world, just knowing that live music is still happening and they're all still out there, and just the confirmation that my friends aren't dead yet. I can pare down the music that has close to literally saved my life in the last year. Little Willie John. I listen to Little Willie John about every day. I could listen to I Need Your Love So Bad 25 times a day, and it doesn't lose anything. And I implore anyone out there who's having a bad day, or just anybody, you don't have to be having a bad day, listen to Let Them Talk all the way to the end really loud, and remember that we're alive. Little Willie John, that's where I'm at right now.
So I guess I'm about to out myself, but so, I mean, there are a couple of different things. One is that I was obsessed for a while when it first came out with the AC/DC record.
Oh.
I just, maybe I just needed this right now. It was like a, and I'm not writing about music right now. And I texted a friend of mine, and he was like, "You should have written that." And I said, "I wish I could," but it was some, it was just such a, like a bar fight, sort of like a record that I just, in this time, and Angus, kind of having to do it almost not by himself, but having to, like, the strength that must have taken, you can tell, like, he's particularly proud of this record, and so to me that the record was, not only just, it felt just really not politically correct and really angry and really kind of almost a throwback and really classic and like a Survivors record, maybe that's what I needed. I listened to music, unfortunately the way music is, a lot of times, living in New York, maybe this is what it is, but, we're in our headphones a lot. So, like, I don't experience music with my children in the way that I thought that I would. We're not in a car as much. And I'm whispering now because they're in there probably. But, listening to, and my oldest son was I knew what he was listening to. I was never one of these people who was like, you have to listen to X, Y, and Z music. Okay. So it was, but my middle son, we listen when I take him to baseball games, and there are hip hop artists, and I can't name them all. I know Lil Baby, Juice World is one that like really stands out. And, you know, and people complain about the new crop of hip hop. But when I'm listening to what he's listening to and what they're talking about and the skill set that I hear, I'm like, this is good. I mean, stuff is still good. This is his golden age. And then I was in my car and I listened to Murmur with one of my children straight through. And I never thought I would have that experience because, you know, the boys are great and, you know, but they're very, and so, and she's stepping back, Susie and the Banshee, she's like really stepping back and like really exploring, you know, and I've gotten little windows because, you know, they don't tell you everything, but that's what gives me life is sort of rediscovering or the possibility of, you know, for all I know, this is all I'm going to get for the next 5 years. But just the chance to see that people are still, their minds are still being blown. You know, their minds are still being blown. And, you know, by music that's new, but also, you know, classic music. I mean, you know, she's really discovering things and it's tied into her as a young woman. And, you know, this is the first time I saw Karen's reaction, but when you know, when I tell people who know about music that I have a daughter who says she's obsessed with Stevie Nicks, you know what that comes with and all the wonderfulness and the complexity and
I just want to welcome her to the sisterhood is what I want to do. Come and join us.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. And I want to turn things over. You know, one final thing I will say is that, you know, in my experience with Dave Marsh, and I think all of us here, including all three of the folks that I've been, you know, privileged to be in conversation with right now, you know, so much of what I think about is the communities that Dave Marsh has created and that my own journey has brought me into contact with through him and through others. And one of those people is also Danny Alexander, who is here to field some Q&A questions. And so it is my privilege to welcome my friend Danny into the conversation as well. What are we seeing in terms of Q&A?
Just like a person that Dave Marsh like made out of clay. But, anyway, we have some good questions here. In fact, you may have I'm going to try to get through them quick, so we'll see how it goes. First of all, speaking of collaboration, Book of Rock List contributor Scott Pellegrino asks, should a moronic and at least semi-racist organization like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame still be collaborated with? How the fuck does garbage like Green Day and Foo Fighters get in before New York Dolls, Chaka Khan, Richard Thompson, Living Colour, and Pete Townsend solo?
Well,
Take that?
in their defense, they also cover the NFL draft.
That's an inside joke, right? Do you want to explain that?
No, they cover the inside. They have a lot of coverage of the NFL draft.
Uh-huh.
I know I've had good experiences with visiting the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but mostly due to Dave. I don't. Yeah, I'm not going to touch that one.
Yeah. Any thoughts?
Well, I'm not touching it either. You know, I'm on the nominating committee. You know, there's a process, you know.
Yeah.
But I do know that I'm very, as a nominating committee person, every year I feel good about the ballot, you know. But yeah, I feel good about the ballot, and I feel good about. I feel good. I'm not touching it, but I can't not. I don't know why I'm talking if I'm not touching.
Well, I'm not
I'll
touching
touch
it.
it.
I don't know
I'll
enough
touch it.
about it.
Okay, go ahead, Karen. I mean,
I'll touch it. So I often say the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame matters because it matters. For a lot of the artists, it is a recognition that is meaningful to them. And I don't like that Eric Clapton is in 3 times. I don't like that. But I absolutely have a lot to say about who's not in it. And the fact that the MC5 once again have missed it. Graham Parsons is not. I could do this. I could do a whole seminar on this. But it matters. It definitely matters. And it matters, I think, the most for the 3,000 dudes that replied to, you know, LL Cool J or I'm blanking, whoever, anyone who's not a white rock and roller with, it's not the Rock and Rap Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
It's just, it's, do they listen to themselves? Do they really think they're original? So yes, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame matters because it matters. Go read Patti Smith's op-ed in the Times. Watch some of those, read some of the, especially, you know, some of the early artists. It matters to them. So that's why it needs to be supported. And I think I've only been to one ceremony. I went the year the East Street Band got in, and that experience of being like, it was like being at a wedding, you know, like the Kiss fans were congratulating the Springsteen. It was, so yeah, that's my thought on Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But I'll still say, you know, fuck them for everybody who's not in it.
I would also say too, Danny, I know we got other questions, but the other thing I would say too, and I very much echo what Karen was saying, and I mean, I can, you know, there is a whole lot to say about all the people who are not in and all of that. I would also echo James's comment about the nominating committee versus the voting body and that kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. But the other thing I would say, actually, in reference to something James was saying about his kids and, you know, seeing people's minds blown, is one thing that I try to avoid when I get grumpy about certain parts of who's not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame versus who is. Others I am very grumpy about and will remain grumpy about. There are still systemic problems, right? But one thing that I try to remember in relation, again, to what James was saying is, like, I think another thing that I try to keep in mind is, you know, who's blowing the minds of younger generations who are getting in now. And when I'm grumpy about folks who are getting in versus folks who are not, like, for example, I mean, I don't want to litigate Green Day or the Foo Fighters, but I will say, you know, Green Day in particular has blown a lot of people's minds in ways that bring them into a conversation. And I think I always try to keep that in mind when I get, you know, thinking about who is or who isn't in, with the caveat that there are hugely significant systemic things that need to be addressed, and that you know, that I think, yeah, are continuing conversations. But I always try to keep that in mind. Like, don't forget who's blowing minds of people just because they're not blowing your minds.
Yeah, well, the thing that gets me, I think it's an indication of where our society is, as much as where the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is, that people get offended that Jay-Z is inducted, but they don't give a second thought to Woody Guthrie or Joan Baez or ABBA or anybody else. You know, like, this is not, that's maybe the only time you ever hear Woody Guthrie, Joan Baez, and ABBA in the same sentence. But I just think it's just like another shadow cast by white supremacy in our country that is just hard to shake, and we got to keep working on it. And I think that's one reason that I continue to even engage with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, because I do know there are people working to try and change that. And as much as it's not the most important thing in the world, it is the place for the music that we love, you know, that where they honor it in that fashion. So I think it's I don't know. That's my 2 cents on that one. I don't want to.
Since we only have about time for one more, right? I'm going to give you 3 and 1. Okay. So look for the piece you want to answer. They're all tied together, but the piece you want to answer here. I see great resonance between your various experiences with Dave and my own. For example, talking and never really stop, and especially his activism for equality and fraternity. How has Dave's egalitarianism impacted your own approaches to music and writing? That's kind of part one. Then from the personal to the political, did this form of collaboration strike you as a model for larger actions and movements? I think James sort of spoke to some of this earlier about the source. Does it still strike you that way? Another way to think about it, what is the value of Dave's work and vision to larger actions and movements?
Well, I think one way I can connect it pretty simply is that Dave's writing and his all the work that I've seen him do outside of the writing, which is mostly connecting people. I see him constantly connecting people in person, online. You know, if you ever, you know, I've sat in hotel lobbies with him and Sam Moore sits down. I don't often get to sit and talk with Sam Moore for a couple hours, but I have. But just that way that he treats everybody, that it's not odd for him to have a friend like me and a friend like Sam Moore at the same time. There's no hierarchy there, but that we can all do that in our own individual lives, and that our work itself is not necessarily the thing that is gonna, I mean, that's just part of what we do. Like whatever we write, like any song I write is just part of the work that I'm doing, you know, here, you know, like if we're really going to change things, it's going to take a personal change. So one thing that I take from Dave is that it is all personal. And like, I don't know how that gets to be put as a bad thing. I don't know what this objectivity thing that people keep talking about. But you know, that we have, I think Dave said in his speech that when he was talking with Daniel, one thing that I think about a lot, like, say I grew up in this racist place. Then I found out, like, we don't always know everything until we experience it or come across it. But then once you know, we can either try to do something about it or we can blow it off or whatever. But I mean, for a lot of us, it's not really a choice. And I think trying to keep that in our personal lives and our writing, Dave's been invaluable for that. For me, I mean, just as an example, like, you know, you can stay true to yourself. You're going to piss some people off, but you can't focus on every little negative. I think our society now, people are so in tune, like worried about backlash on every single thing, like that a lot of times people are too timid to take a stand on anything. And I think if people who are in a position to actually affect change or who do have a voice and an audience don't do something to help people who don't have a voice and who aren't represented, then, you know, I think it's a kind of wasting your platform there.
Karen or James?
I don't. What Chris said sounded good. I do not remember all of your questions.
Yeah,
You asked a lot of questions.
Oh, well, it's really just
morning.
how does, okay, but it's really just about how do you see this work envision the work that Dave does? How do you see it translating into something you carry forward into other movements and struggles? And that is a good answer. Yes.
So I think that
sorry, I didn't mean to overwhelm.
No, you didn't over. It's fine. It's just my brain. Well, you know, my brain is, I'd like my brain back. I'd like my pre-pandemic brain back. It's not I don't know that I'm qualified to answer that question because I feel like I don't have to think about it. It's a thing I do for good and for bad. But the thing that occurred to me as Chris was speaking, which was a more exact answer, was, you know, we are all human beings having a human experience, and we will make mistakes and we will learn. Like, one of the things I think about as I was having a conversation online about how I cannot listen to Brown Sugar anymore. I can't, like, once it hit me, I can't.
I'm
And
with
this-
you.
And this woman, I'm glad it's at the end of the set and I can walk out of the show early. And some woman was like, "You think you're so perfect?" I'm like, "No, I don't. I didn't know." But then when I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. And now I cannot hear it. So I don't think that we have room for is for people seem to feel like they have to present as, "Oh, I was always this perfect and this evolved." No, the point of being a progressive is to progress. That's it, Mike.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, I don't have anything. I feel like I inadvertently, thank you, Danny, for giving me the out, because I feel like I did address a lot of the questions, and these two answers were, but, going back to the topic of the panel, I really think it's important for people to, as writers and as artists, encouraging each other in the ways that we talked about is very important. There are things that Dave said and did, or I heard 30 years ago about me or to me that still sustain me. And I think those of us who are in a position to mentor people, it's just really important to understand that you can really, make a real difference. And it sounds so corny, but it's true.
Absolutely true.
Yep.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add, Dave has helped me through, he's given me a gift like that at a time when I was younger, it meant a lot that somebody was listening, and especially Dave, because I knew he wasn't going to lie about it. If Dave told me he liked my stuff, I knew he wasn't doing it to blow sunshine up my ass. If he didn't like my song, he'd tell me. And I just think that part of the respect of that he thought, not just him, but because we're talking about him, that really had huge value to me. And I just want to add that this whole conference, I'm still swimming in all the stuff that's going on, but I think it can kind of be distilled down to what are you going to do about it? Here we are, this is all the things that we're doing, writers, artists, musicians, whatever it is. We all care about these things. And when we're confronted with them, especially in the world we have now, what are we going to do about it? And I think that's what these conversations, that's the value. And I think that's a great thing. It's a great way to honor Dave, I think, because that's what he's brought to my life and a lot of our lives is not just opinions, but these questions and conversations that come from the work.
Well, very much.
Well, that's a terrific place to close. We could go on longer if we wanted. I'm sure we've got another panel coming up at 1:30 Eastern, focusing on music and education, where the spirit of teaching and learning meets. So this discussion continues. I also want to point out that on the Land of Hope and Dreams website, we now have two new sections. One is videos, where all of the conference videos are placed in one spot, and one is readings. And the readings section includes all of the recommended readings for each of the panels, but it also includes something that we discovered last week. Actually, my mom discovered it in an email I had forwarded to her. It was called Dave Marsh's Dream. And he sent that out to an email list that a number of us are on back in 2007, I believe. And we've posted that in its entirety on the readings section of Land of Hope and Dreams. And I urge you to check it out. If there's a summation of Dave Marsh's vision, that's it. It's right there. And so thank you all for speaking so eloquently to how Dave has mentored and showed empathy and collaborated with y'all. We've all experienced it, and we'll continue the discussion at 1:30 with music and education. See you then.